Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm very grateful to have Eric Coryell with us today. Eric has worked with over 500 organizations as an award-winning trainer, facilitator, and coach. He is the author of Revolutionize Teamwork: How to Create and Lead Accountable Teams. And he dedicates his working life to helping leaders engage their employees through the creation of functional and accountable teams. And I'm so delighted to have you here with us, Eric, because this is such an important conversation, especially these days where team engagement and results are so important. And I really believe in your work, and I'm excited for people to hear about it. So you're ready to dive right in?
I'm ready.
All right. So what do you mean by accountability or accountable teams?
It's a good place to start. For me, I used to have what I call the standard definition of accountability, and that was being accountable means you're going to do what you say you're going to do in the time frame you said you do it, right? And that's kind of how accountability is viewed: do what you say you're going to do. But then I started to realize no one ever always does what they said they're going to do, and the accountability really, gets determined when what happens after they fail to meet their expectations. Non-accountable people make excuses, they point fingers, they hide, where other people who we call accountable act very differently. And if I were to boil that down, I would make a case that accountable people, when they fall short of expectations, own it. But most importantly, they start doing something different till they get it fixed. So if you can agree on that as a definition of accountability, then the question becomes, what is an accountable team? An accountable team to me is the same thing, except for it's a group of people owning the results. If you pay attention on most teams, especially inside business settings, if someone is not getting the desired results, it's usually the leader that comes in and addresses the issue. And that's what I call leader-led accountability. And that's norm for most organizations and most teams. But the concept of an accountable team is, okay, if expectations aren't being met, the team gets together and the team starts addressing those issues. They're the ones that start initiating change until the desired results happen. And that's what an accountable team looks like.
It is a fascinating topic, and I imagine a lot of the leaders that are listening are like, all right, I love that, right? I really want that. Or maybe some of them are saying, well, wait a second, right? I really value my ability to fight the fires and fix the problems, and I kind of like having some control over that, right? It kind of
Absolutely.
makes me feel good to step in and take the lead, so to speak. So, what can you say to those individuals that right now are really struggling because they're overworked to begin with, but having to take the extra load off of their team that might not be fully meeting their expectations is really draining them?
Sure. And I will tell you, as I get to work with lots of teams, the biggest single challenge in getting a team to be accountable is the leader's inability or unwillingness to let go of control. I spent years trying to get my team to be accountable, but at the end of the day, I wanted all the control. And I finally realized you can't have both, right? And I liken it often just to coaching. When I talk to coaches, I've never been one, but I'm fascinated by it. And I will tell you, every coach at some point in time will tell me the same thing. They're like, Eric, during the game, it's a really helpless feeling. You kind of want to run out there, tell them what to do or do it for them, but you can't. I mean, imagine how the players would start to feel if the coaches came in every time it was a critical play and they took over, right? Well, that's a facetious example. That doesn't happen unless we're at work. At work, when I got to make sure something gets done right, gets done the way I wanted to or on time, my tendency as a leader is to jump in and make sure that happens. And I think the ultimate reason for that is, at the end of the day, if the team fails, it reflects on me, right? So I'm going to make sure the team doesn't fail. So while on one hand, I love the idea of having an accountable team, I'm not the only one awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. The whole world isn't on my shoulders, just like you described. On the other hand, it's terrifying because if the team does fail, guess who gets blamed first, right? It's usually the coach or the leader. So learning to balance those two things it's probably the biggest single challenge in making this happen. So the good news for those who are scared to do this, I get it. I mean, the good news is that, hey, you're going to get more people's head around the issues. They're going to become more engaged. They're going to become more empowered. You're going to have an easier time attracting talent, especially younger talent, easier time keeping them. So the upsides are there, but you're going to have to get comfortable with the notion of letting go of some control. And that's the challenge. And so a lot of what I end up teaching is how do you manage that? And how do you do that in a way that allows you to still feel good about your contribution and your role, At the same time, allow other people to be their best versions and not have to be the one that's always making sure everything is working on time or right.
I think it's really meaningful that you are kind of taking us there on this conversation, right? To the real issue at heart, which
Sure.
is the kind of feeling safe in uncertainty or in not having as much control.
Right.
Because it's like, yeah, the benefits are clear, right? To
Mm-hmm.
everybody, if I let go a little bit and I have an opportunity to empower others and for them to learn and grow, even if it's through mistakes, to right, all of that. But at the same time, the mindset, the belief for a lot of people is this is part of my identity, right? I'm
Yes.
the expert or I am the warrior
Mm-hmm.
that gets things done. And so to let that go is almost like, letting go of our superpower.
Yes.
So how do we do that? I love that you're going to get to that. Like, what do we do?
Well, yeah. And so first of all, I think it's becoming consciously aware of what drives you for the need for control, right? And so work, is unique in that it's, when I'm coaching a little league or soccer, I mean, I'm doing it as a volunteer. I'm offering to help. Work's my paycheck, work's my financial future, right? And work's my retirement plan. And for a lot of people, myself included, work was my sense of value, was my sense of purpose, my contribution to the world. And you get promoted. I got promoted because I was good at doing whatever the job was, right? So now I'm the leader, right? And so it was hard sometimes to let go of that because that's what I'm comfortable doing. That's what I got rewarded for. So a big part of it is helping the leader kind of come to grips with, hey, what are you here for, and what does it really mean to be a leader, and making that mind shift of what got you there, what got you to where you are isn't going to get you where you need to go, right? And so part of the necessary ingredients is to get the leader rethinking their role. But another part is to do the things that'll give them the comfort of letting go of control. Uh, Even some of the most high performing, highly accountable teams I know, they don't have all the decision making. At the end of the day, the leader will always have a different level of accountability than the team does. So it's learning to manage that transition of, these are all the decisions I make to a future state where the team's making more of the decisions, but making it clear which ones they can make and which ones I continue to make. And there's multiple levels even within that. I mean, as I'll work with the team, we'll kind of map out, okay, what are all the major decisions that affect the team's ability to achieve their purpose, right? So you map them out. Well, some of those, the leader's going to say, that one's still mine. And so it's what I'll call level one decision, right? Level two, three, and four decisions are individual team members or the team's decisions, but some of those, the leader wants the team to run it past them before they act. Now, at the end of the day, the leader has no say, but I want to at least be able to weigh in. So share some of my experience, but I trust you to make the decision. Some of those I just need to be kept apprised on, right? I don't want to show up at the holiday party only to find out Johnny's been fired. I didn't know about it, right? So certain things you just got to keep me in the loop on. And then a lot of these things I really don't need to know. So part of the process is kind of creating that map, which then gives the leader control, knowing that, as I go to sleep at night, that I'm being kept apprised of the things I need to, and I'm involved in the other things, and I still have control over the other things I need to keep control of. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's putting the tools in place that allows me to feel comfortable, but then also coming to grips with, as a leader, my job as a leader isn't what my job was before. Before I was much more doing. Now it's helping other people be successful. And if my team becomes extraordinary, I'm still needed. I know of no player on the planet that would ever let someone go who's not great at creating functional and accountable teams, right? So helping them realize that security comes through making others successful. And it took me a long time to come to grips with that.
It really is a mind shift.
Yes, it
And
is.
so let's say that someone really embodies or embraces that new mindset, or at least is curious, right? Leaning
Sure.
towards it,
Yeah.
ready to get more evidence, yes, but kind of leaning towards it. And they've put some processes in place around these different levels of decision making and right when to step in, when not, what to do if things happen. Then it gets to, I believe, probably a place of like trust, right? Because you can have all the processes in the world, but if you don't quite trust because you've been burned in the past by certain individuals or just by people in general, right? Then you might not actually feel comfortable. Or you might see, hey, process is not working because you didn't get the results. And then, right, out the window it goes. So I'm exaggerating here, of course, but what are you seeing in this work?
All right. Well, you just went right to the heart of it all. And what I'll invite people to do, and so I'll take you on a kind of a quick journey, which will summarize all this, is I love to have people think about the absolute best team they've ever been in. Almost everybody has experienced a really good team, whether it's a family, a high school sports team, a band, whatever it is. And think about, okay, what are the attributes that made that team so great? And I'll do this exercise when I work with a group of people. And the fascinating thing to me is I can always take everything I hear and put it into 6 categories. To the point, I am convinced if you want an accountable team, you need to be able to cover all these things. And the first 4 are very structural, and I will make a case it is ultimately the leader's job to get it in place. The first being is if I want my team to be accountable, I have to make it very clear what do I want my team to be accountable for. The exercise I'll often have leaders do is the next time you're together with your team, have everybody pull out a blank sheet of paper and just have them write down individually what each of them thinks the purpose of the team is. And the deal I always make is if the answers match, call me, I'll buy you dinner. And I've never lost that. I mean, as a leader to me, it was obvious what the team was accountable for, only to ask them and discover, oh my goodness, no wonder we're having issues. I had never made it clear as a leader what exactly the team is accountable for. So if I'm a CEO, I may say to my team, on one extreme, you're accountable to do what I tell you to. The other extreme is, look, you as a team are accountable to ensure the sustainable, profitable growth of the organization. So step number 1, you need the foundation of a purpose. Step number 2 is you have to have a way of measuring it to know whether or not we're achieving that purpose, whatever it is. Maybe it is a set of metrics, maybe it's wins and losses, maybe it's a deadline, whatever it is. There's got to be a way for the team to know whether or not they're on track. Interestingly enough, I think most leaders spend the vast majority of their time when it comes to their teams is talking about the things you just talked about, is ensuring we have good processes, good communication, clearly defined roles and responsibilities, good problem solving, and we need competent people, right? I've never seen a functional team that tolerated incompetence. Crazy thing is people talk to me about their best teams, I almost never hear people describe it as a bunch of superstars. Instead, I'll hear we were good at different things, we had different experiences, different perspectives, right? And yet, if you pay attention, that's the one area where leaders spend most of their time is developing the people and processes. And both those things are really important. But the most important thing by far, if you want your team to function like a team, is you need to build a shared faith. And by that, I mean, there has to be the experience of what happens to one happens to all. Any group of people can function well together in low stress, low anxiety environments. But the second there's pressure and adversity, without that shared faith, everyone on the team is going to start worrying about themselves, and teamwork will literally go out the window. In certain environments, that shared fate is built in. So I'll go to team sports. We either win the game together or we lose the game together. It's inherently there. In business settings, there's very often not a shared fate. We tend to define teams in business as groups of individuals that report to somebody, right? So because the 5 of you report to me, I now call you a team, treat you like a team, expect you to function like a team. But honestly, their only shared fate at this point is literally surviving me, the leader. I mean, the conversations amongst them will go as follows. Did you hear what Eric said this morning? No, but you see what the clown did yesterday, right? And those will be the conversations that will gel the team. My first boss out of college, we survived him for 2 years. He left, honestly, for the next 3 years. We told stories about him because that's what made us feel like a team. So if you want a group of people to function like a team, you've got to create some level of meaningful shared fate. You join the military, there's no shared fate. That's what boot camp is all about. Over the next 3 months, they drill it into you. Everyone loses their hair. They all wear the same clothes. Every exercise promotes shared fate, so much so by the end of those 3 months, they would literally die for each other. And that's the missing component when I'll call from the structural piece more often than not. So I think it is a leader's job to lay the strong foundation, purpose, metrics, competent people and capable process, and a shared fate. And if you do those 4 things, you'll watch a group of people actually function like a team. But you can have a functional team, but the leader can still have all the accountability. If you want the functional team to become an accountable team, the next thing needs to happen. And what separates accountable teams from functional teams is that on accountable teams, they deal with their real issues together. And by that, I mean, If something is getting in the way of the team being successful, so let's go back to our definition of accountability. Team is accountable to achieve X, Y, Z. If something is getting in the way of us achieving X, Y, Z, a real issue, then the team has got to start addressing those issues. The good news is most issues aren't real. I mean, if someone has bad breath, we don't need to bring the whole team together and talk about their bad breath because it's not affecting our ability to be successful, right? But if someone is not equally invested in the team, that's a real issue. If someone's not behaving by the values and standards which we agreed to, that's a real issue. If someone is not performing, that's a real issue. Someone is not meeting performance expectations, that's going to get in the way of the team being successful. When I got into business, I was told, Eric, you praise in public, you criticize in private. Most performance reviews, most real issue conversations are held behind closed doors, and then you wonder why you don't have a team. If you ever played a team sport and think about it, where were performance issues dealt with? Everyone will say in front of everybody on the field or in the locker room, it was totally normal. But in business, when we come together in meetings, I'm convinced most teams, as team members, we collude not to talk about our real issues. We'll talk about our real issues in the meeting after the meeting, in our favorite subgroups in the bars, bathrooms, and hallways. But if you've ever been on a great team, go back to it, you'll realize, no, when a real issue came our way, we didn't ignore it. We didn't talk behind each other's back. We didn't sit around for the leader, the boss, the parent, the coach to solve our problems. We dealt with it. And that's when a team becomes accountable. And once that happens, then you get all the other things I hear people describe their best team as. We trusted each other. We had each other's back. We respected each other. You know, we picked each other up. We worked off each other's strengths and weaknesses. But the chicken and the egg to this whole thing is you're not going to have people have these difficult conversations with each other until they trust each other. But I'm not trusting each other until we learn to have these difficult conversations with each other, and that's the challenge. So I am convinced, as having studied so many different teams, if you go back to your best team, there were two critical components. First, you had a shared fate. Second, there was trust. And that's what separates those teams from most, which work really hard to avoid it. So then the question becomes, how do you build trust? Right? And I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. I think she's just special, and her research is extraordinary. And she talks about all the different ways around which trust gets broken, and it just registers with me. But one of the things she said once that really hit home for me was the only way to build trust on a team or even in a relationship is to be able to work through the issues that would otherwise destroy trust in a healthy way. If you think about it, in any relationship or in any team, things are going to happen that could destroy trust, right? And the only way to maintain and then ultimately build trust is to be able to work through those issues in a healthy way. So the magic becomes, how do we learn to deal with our issues in a healthy way? And I will tell you, there's 3 destructive ways and there's 2 constructive ways. Any attempt to ignore the issue destroys trust. Any attempt to talk to other people about the issue destroys trust. And any attempt to become dependent on the leader to deal with all our issues destroys trust. The healthy ways are we either learn to deal with these issues together one-on-one, or in a team setting, we learn to deal with these issues together as a team. And that thought, for most people, especially dealing with our real issues together as a team, is terrifying. And the reason I believe that is that on most teams, there's what I call a psychological contract. Psychological because we've never said the words out loud, but for most teams, it's there. And it's this contract that says, I won't talk about your performance. You just don't talk about mine. And that is an unwritten rule that exists on most teams. And as I work with a team, I'll say, I know it's here. Just pretend for a second I'm your teammate, right? And let's just say right now, I start talking about your non-performance in front of everybody. How are you going to feel? And to a word, everyone's going to say betrayed and attacked and defensive. And you're going to have no choice but to declare thermonuclear war, right? Eric, how dare you? You just broke the deal. Even though we've never expressed this deal, that deal is clearly there. So, long answer to your short question, you're exactly right. In order to make this happen, you got to build the trust. But in order to build the trust, you got to learn to have these conversations with each other in a healthy way. And it's a learned behavior. And I never learned how to do it. And so learning how to have the difficult conversations in a constructive way then equips the team to be able to do it. but it's the shared fate that makes it happen. Because I may know how to have the difficult conversation, but I'm not motivated to have that conversation unless at the end of the day, excuse me, your success or failure is connected to mine.
Brilliant. I believe in every single word that you've said, really. And I think that every leader needs to hear this and most importantly, to apply it. So when we speak of shared fate, right, you even said one way to do that is like the us versus them, right? Us, the team versus them, the leader or the leaders.
Right.
That's one way, right?
Yep.
Not a productive way, but a way, right? So, and the reason I bring this up is one of the organizations that my company is working with, that was kind of the starting point, is that you have the whole team, right, which seems to have rapport between each other, right, the project managers and between themselves and all the team members, and against the three kind of main leaders, right, of the pack. So what happened was is that there's rapport there with each other, not as much trust with the leaders, and the leaders are getting frustrated because it's like they're needing to step in and fight the fires when things are not being met, right? And they're saying, we trusted the team. They said they would do it, but they didn't do it. So I needed to spend my entire weekend, and I shouldn't need to do that at this level, and this point in my career. So the idea here is that there is kind of healthy shared fates and not so healthy. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So I will say the default shared fate for most teams is what I'll call surviving the leader. In the absence of any other shared fate, that usually ends up being the source of the bond between team members. There's other unhealthy ones. Very often it's as a teammate that people will turn on, right? We'll talk behind their back. So the team will fracture into subgroups, and the subgroups will bond around their frustration around their teammate. So left, excuse me here, left to my own devices, very often shared fate gets built around circumstantial stuff. And it's not usually very healthy. It's usually a source of frustration. So I tend to put what I'll call healthy shared fates into two categories. There's more positive shared fates and there's negative shared fates. And I'm not here to tell you negative is always bad. Sometimes in the short term, negative shared fates can be very powerful. Classic illustration is ever watched Miracle on Ice, going back to 1980, United States hockey team. We'd bring a group of college kids together, and in 3 months, expect them to be functioning really well as a team. And we would take on these other countries who would bring their amateurs together, even though they're paid and they stayed intact for 4 years. And we never got 6th or 7th place. Well, the coach that year realized, these kids come from competing colleges. They're not going to bond unless I can create a shared fate quickly. And his strategy was literally to get the players to hate him. He did go to assistant coaches. You guys are going to have to mop up after me, but I got to get these guys bonded, and I'm going to do it by driving them hard and get them to hate me, but trust that, that at the end of the day, they're going to bond around that. The end will justify the means. We have a chance at winning the medal, right? We ended up obviously winning the gold. So I watched negative shared fates and other things, survival will create a shared fate. COVID for a while, for about a week, it created a shared fate amongst the whole universe, right? And then we fractured again. But adversity can create shared fate. And I will tell you, it can be very powerful. It tends, however, to work better in the short term. In the longer term, if you want to get people to bond around an experience or have the experience of what happens to all, what I'll call more positive shared fates tend to be more meaningful. So making the work that we do very meaningful to everybody creates a sense of shared fate. If there's a sense of purpose around what we do, that creates a shared fate. Achieving a set of metrics together creates a shared fate. One of my favorites is getting a team to become accountable around a set of metrics together. So as I'll work with the leadership team, the leader, I'll say, okay, what do you want the team to be accountable for? And usually it's some variation of profitability, sales, and sustainability. I'm like, okay, so how are you going to measure that? Well, we have to measure revenue and profitability. And if we're going to be sustainable, we have to have happy customers. And if we're going to be sustainable, we have to have a workforce that people want to work at. I'm like, all right. So now what'll happen is the team now needs to, as a team, to become accountable on those metrics. So at the end of the month, if sales is not meeting expectations, the team's got to get together and problem solve. Well, HR is like, I don't affect sales. Yeah, you do. CFO is like, I don't affect sales. Yeah, you do. So my deal with my leadership team was actually quite simple. The second a graph goes from green to red, in other words, meeting expectations to not, you have 10 days to develop a corrective action plan and present it to me. In other words, I need to know that you know what's going on and you got a plan to fix it. Okay? And at the end of the 10 days, I need to know what you're going to do different to fix the sales problem. And what that did is it forced them to work together to figure out, okay, how are we going to fix sales? And sales was no longer just the sales manager. And employee engagement wasn't just HR, it's everybody. We all have to make this a reality, right? And as is profitability or whatever it is. So a part of it is the leaders changing their mindset around, if I have a sales issue, I talk to you. If a marketing issue, I talk to you. If I have operations, to know if, if there's an issue, over the overall accountability, I'm talking to you as a team, right? So being accountable to a set of metrics together creates a shared faith. Proximity creates shared faith. One of my favorite ways to create shared faith is to literally bring a team together into a conference room and say, okay, guys, for the next 4 weeks, we're going to work together out of this room. Bring your laptops. You'll be amazed at what that does to create shared faith. Common enemy creates shared. I mean, there's so many ways to create shared faith. And those are all, tend to be more positive. But as I said, the negative works well too. One of my favorite stories to share goes back a number of years ago on the deck of a good friend of mine. He's got 5 kids. I've known these kids since they were born. And I'm sitting there and it occurs to me in that moment, like they're really good kids, like 5 for 5, like disgustingly good kind of kid kind of thing, right? So I turned to him, I'm like, oh, how the heck did you pull this off? So he starts explaining the parenting thing to me because he keeps insisting I'm not one because I've only got 1 kid. He's like, you're not really a parent till you have 2 because then you're in man to man. But once you have 3 kids, now you're outnumbered and the game changes completely. But by the time you get to 5, you kind of have to resort to extraordinary measures. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what's that? And he goes, well, my wife, Beth and I figured out pretty early on the only way we were going to survive having 5 kids is to treat them like a team. So, of course, my ears perk up. I'm like, well, how do you do that? And he goes, simple. Whenever any one of them acts out, we punish all 5 the same. I'm like, you what? He's like, oh, works like a charm. He goes, think about it. Sophia starts acting out right now. What do you think the other 4 are going to do? I'm like, well, I guess they're going to go tell her to stop it because they don't want to get in trouble. He's like, exactly. In fact, they just grounded their oldest kid for 2 days. First time they were grounded a kid. And all of a sudden it occurred to Beth that while the other kids didn't do it, they all knew about it. So she grounded them all. And I'm like, that's nuts. And he's like, no, Eric, that's what you teach. We want them to function like a team. We treat them like a team. So the point is, if you want to build that shared faith, there's lots of ways to do it. But you just have to think through how do you create that experience of what happens to one happens to all. The stronger you need that team to be, the greater the shared faith you have to build. That's why basic training and boot camp is so intense, because I got to find out those that are willing to put the team ahead of themselves. And if they're not, we got to get them out. Because in the heat of the battle, you have to instinctively care more about your teammate than you do yourself. Other environments probably don't require that dramatic or that intense of a shared faith. But the stronger you need the team to be, the greater the shared faith you have to build.
So let's pretend that we have a team that has a shared fate. Yeah, so we got him there in one of these ways.
Sure.
And then there is some unexpected event, some big stressor, big trigger that has come up. What do you notice happens behaviorally in those teams? Do they maintain that, or does something else happen?
That's a great question. I can tell you, I can give an answer and go back 2.5 years when COVID started. I get to work with lots of organizations, right? And lots of teams. And COVID comes in and it is a huge stressor on every client I had in some capacity. Either it meant we had work, we didn't know what to do, or we had no work, or now we're working from home, and it created a massive stressor. And looking back, I can tell you, I can put every client into one of 3 categories. There were clients that had really strong teams going into this. And I will tell you, by and large, those teams responded well, they pivoted, they dealt with reality, they just worked through it well. A lot of other clients didn't have as healthy teams. And one of 2 things happened. Either this stressor created such a shared faith that they pulled together and started functioning in ways they'd never functioned before, or they absolutely imploded, that the fact that they were unable to work through the simplest things just got magnified in their inability to deal with this much larger problem. Yes, there are times healthy teams, a big stressor can tear apart a good team, and I've seen it happen. But I will tell you, most really good teams, they may get knocked down, but they find a way to pick themselves back up, and they'll end up becoming stronger when it's all said and done. All high performing teams aren't always successful. But what I find by and large is they may get knocked down, but they'll pick themselves back up because the fundamentals are there, the trust is there, all the things we talk about. It's the ones that aren't as healthy. A big stressor will tend to do one of two things, and I saw them both. It was fascinating to almost watch.
That's really cool that you have this recent example, right, of having worked with multiple organizations to see the different impacts. And so this is a reminder of just how important each of us doing our own resilience work, of course, our own coherence training, if you will, right? Self-regulating, in terms of our own personal stress or perception of stress, but also creating that team coherence, because everything that you're describing, right? The shared vision, the shared, faith, the trust, all of that is really about building this shared rapport, harmony, coherence. And there's an energy to that, right? We can feel it. And that's why I love the example that you had us kind of go to, remembering a time when we had that and kind of noticing, how did it feel? What do we notice? Right? Maybe even multiple examples like that, if we're fortunate to have those, right? What do we see as some connecting dots? And maybe thinking of a time, current or past, where we didn't have that. It was a completely incoherent team environment. What did that look, and feel like? So the important thing is what I'm hearing also is the preparation. So there's the preparation in terms of the systems and all of that, but also like the little things, like you said, like the hallway things and the boot camp and all of that is preparation for the unexpected events, to kind of withstand the storm, right? To be a strong lighthouse together, everybody together, right? As one. So how do we, clearly you've shared a lot of wonderful strategies to get there. How do we sustain it, I guess, is the question, right? If we're fortunate to get to that point, what can we do to sustain it?
Yeah, so I love the word you used at the very beginning, and that's resiliency. And I also, my experience parallels what you said, is that part of this is individual work, that as individuals, as we become more resilient, we become better team players, right? But I also think there's a resiliency a team develops. And you're right, you do need to lay the foundation. You need the clear purpose, you need the metrics, how to be able to process, and the shared faith, right? If you don't have that solid foundation, that team will get fractured pretty darn easy. Resiliency for a team, once that's established, now obviously we have to start getting good at dealing with our relations together, right? And that's where resiliency comes from. The more things you take on together as a team, the stronger the team becomes. And it's fun because when I'll have people think about their best teams, and they'll be shouting out, all the different things that are true about that team, invariably someone will say, well, we had conflict and we didn't always agree, and we had some tough conversations with each other, at which point I would stop and say, just out of curiosity, who else had that in their best team? And almost always everybody will say, raise their hand. It may not be the first thing they thought of when they thought about their best team. Usually it'll be like trust or whatever. But they're like, yeah, oh yeah, we did that. We had the difficult conversations. And my question then becomes, let me ask you a question. Go back to that team. Go back to a time you had a difficult conversation. Go back to a time you had to work through something tough. What happened to the team after you did that? Did it become stronger or weaker? And I will always hear the word stronger. And I'm like, well, what happened to trust? Did it go up or down? Well, it went up. Okay. And then what happened to fear of separation? You can put in the term of psychological safety. Well, like fear of separation went down, or on the flip side, psychological safety, it went up. Every time we had to work through a tough situation together, the psychological safety in that group went up. And our ability to take on another issue became better and better and better. Because you almost start out dealing with little things, but then, we got that. Okay, next, we can do this, right? And that resiliency just develops as a team. And the more resilient we become, the higher levels of psychological safety. When people say to me, you mean the teams you work with will be giving performance reviews to each other? I'm like, all the time. Go back to your best team. You did it all the time. You didn't think twice about it. And yet, for most people, that thought is terrifying. Instead, I'm going to ignore the issue or talk behind people's back or wait for the leader to deal with it. And all those things destroy trust. And the only way to build trust is to do that. And yet it's very rarely done in families or even in work teams as well.
And I have a sense that that is at least in part because of self-trust. So if we look at kind of our inner world, right, the inner world of parts, if we can call them that, right, and then we've got the external world. If we have trust with ourselves, right, then we're much more likely to feel safe when we're in the difficult conversations with others.
No question.
To really be present with them rather than activate our own stuff, right? To just be present and be loving and compassionate, or at least curious, rather than judging. And then there is kind of an energetic dance that goes on, right? And we know that from science, right? Our heart rate variability pattern can synchronize with theirs, and then there's a different pattern rhythm kind of going to their head brain, which allows them to think better. And then there's trust just goes up, and we can measure it. We can actually measure the coherence in a room, right? So this is such a fascinating conversation. Fascinating, because I think that it is the truth. We're looking at it from a team, kind of organizational team, but this is also our planet, right? When there's less fear and division, because we do all the things that you're describing for us to do, right, in a bigger scale, then we've got solutions to problems, and we've got, compassion, and right, all of this kind of stuff. And it's interesting because when there's a world disaster or, some big issue somewhere in the world, right, all of these areas of the world that may be very much in conflict with each other still rally together, shared faith, right, to support something or to fight against something, right, whatever the shared enemy is. So you can see this on a much bigger scale as well.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. And a lot of people will say to me, similar to what you talked about too, as well, but they'll take it to a different conclusion. In order to do this, people have to have that high level of self-trust, and they have to have all that stuff. And I'll tell you, if people are there, it makes it much easier. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. The good news is, what I found is that, to your point, that if a team starts to function, I always tell you, I have this little ego. It doesn't like to be told it's not perfect, right? But if I know your intent is just to help me get better, I get over my little ego pretty darn quick. If I trust your intent, I get past my ego. If I trust your intent is to help the team, I get past my little ego. But if I don't trust your intent, my little ego flares in a heartbeat. I get defensive and all sorts of it, right? So as trust is built on a team, even if my own level of self-trust isn't there, if I start to develop a trust around the intent of the other people in the team, which I do by going through these difficult situations together and finding out what people really feel, etc., then that will start to build my own sense of self-trust. And because that psychological safety I'm surrounded by and all the things you just talked about start to happen. So it isn't always that you have to do the individual first and the team will happen. Very often, if the team starts doing the right thing, that will help build up the individual. And so they can feed on each other. But I've come to realize not everyone has to be to that point before a team can start doing this. That if you start doing the things that build the trust, and stop doing the things that destroy the trust, like talking behind each other's back and all that kind of stuff, that creates an environment that allows me, at least when I'm with that team, to feel safe and to trust them and myself. And the more that happens, it just perpetuates.
That's right. And if it doesn't come from within, then it comes from the culture, right? The energy around. And the leader, of course, are they modeling that? Right? Mm-hmm. Vulnerability. Are they modeling, right, owning things when they didn't go right? Are they modeling, right, consistent communication throughout a change, really still being there, right? Caring about the person, the human versus the task or the result, right? All of that stuff, right? Because I think you hit the nail on the head. If somebody feels that their leader or team member, right, have their best interest at heart, then they're willing to find a way to do the difficult stuff. Have the difficult conversations, go through the hard times, work the extra hours, whatever it might be, because they feel safe. Right?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is,
This was
oh,
good, good. No. Go ahead.
I'm just like, thrilled to have this conversation. I really believe every leader needs to read your book, needs
Ah,
to, engage in your work, because it really is at the heart, and I use that word very selectively, compassion, right? At the heart of change. And
yeah.
it really is about that.
Yeah, I think about accountability as change, right? So what it means to be accountable is I do something different, I change until I get the desired results. So those two things to me are very related. Right? And I think it is the leader's job is to decide how they want to manage accountability. And I'm not here to tell you every team should be an accountable team. I think for some you don't need an accountable team, or you can't create maybe it's not really a team, you know. So as a leader, I got to decide how do I want accountability to be managed. I can do it as a leader. I can have what I'll call leader-led accountable, which means I'm dealing with the non-performance issues. I'm dealing with the real issues. And the good news is I get control. Bad news is I don't get to go on vacation. The team is only going to be as good as I am. I'm probably gonna have a hard time attracting and retaining talent. There's downsides to it, but the flip side, I get the control, right? If, however, I decide, okay, I want the team now to start managing accountability, it flips. I've got to get comfortable letting go of control. That's hard. I have to realize my role as a leader is much more like a parent or a coach, which is not easy. But then on the flip side, I get the rewards of creating an environment that people can be the best versions of themselves and they're more customer focused and accountable to each other and all kind of good stuff. So, and it's not one or the other. It can be a combination of both. But when I convince my role in this world is to help leaders understand the difference. But then most importantly is once I know the difference and I decide I want this, to be able to understand what you got to do to get there. And it's not easy, but at the same time, you can do it with any team. The team members may not be the same when we're all said and done, but I will tell you most teams can get there as long as the leader learns to do the necessary steps and it's courage to let go of control. And it's not easy.
Yeah, which is why also it starts from the very top, right? If there is a top in that way,
Very
because it
often.
needs to be a culture where it's safe for the leader, him or herself, to
Yes.
fail, right? Or
Yes.
temporarily until they get kind of the team on board with learning new things and adapting to change. So it's about everybody's safety. And it starts
Yes.
from the very top of the chain, so to speak, them feeling safe, believing it's possible.
Yes.
And then there's that trickle down.
Totally
So
agree.
thank you.
Oh,
This
you're
is such
welcome.
a
Hopefully it's
joy.
helpful.
It is. How can people learn more about you and your book, your
Mm.
programs?
Yeah, I've been doing this for 15 years. I still haven't finished my website. I've just been too busy. But you can reach me at Eric at Accountable Teams. So it's Accountable Teams, all one word, plural.com. So that's my email. Um, I was asked to write a book. A publishing firm came to me several years ago and said, "Do you have a book?" I'm like, "No." And they're like, "You need a book." I'm like, "I know." And they said, "Well, we'd like to publish your book because we've been looking for unique material and accountability in teams for years, and we think this is it." I'm like, "Great." I'm like, "Well, there's one caveat. We believe every business book's too long. So we only publish books that can be read in an hour or less. So if you can condense all this down in an hour, we'd love to do it." And so the book's called Revolutionize Teamwork. You can buy it at Barnes& and Noble or Amazon. And it's a comprehensive, high level perspective on all the things we talked about. It'll kind of lay out the structural stuff, but then also kind of delve in deeper into the behavioral stuff. Because a lot of what I teach is very contrarian in terms of, as we talked about, if we want to build trust, we have to learn to deal with our issues in a good way. And so a lot of the things I've learned in order to do that in a constructive way, opposite things I've always been taught. So, for example, I don't allow group pronouns to be used in meetings. I never allow the words we, they, our, anybody. I don't allow people to ask questions that are preceded by statements. So a lot of what I'll call the behavioral changes that need to take place in order to have these healthy conversations are in there as well. So that might be a good starting point. And if that resonates, then by all means, you're more than welcome to reach out. And if you want further, I'm glad to do what I can to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.